You move into the big debate about the more data that's collected about everything we do, whether it's your Fitbit and your health, and then you're asking questions about what's my heart rate is this? What do I do? I've taken these medications. All of this data, which is private data, all of this data is now being collected and can be used in increasingly vast amounts of quantities. And not only the data is collected, you might say it's always been there, but the ability to process it in a meaningful way through a machine learning model in the hands of individuals that the information wasn't necessarily intended for. That is a big societal impact. A lot of the AI governance, safety and ethics is not reinventing the wheel. It is tried and tested in the airline industry. It's tried and tested in the food standards industry. Everything is about assessing risk. Everything is about thinking about the impacts and the implications. People adopting AI just seem to go straight in, write it, it's quick, it's magic, it's going to give you the right answer. Just go with it. Because ultimately, those business owners, they might not be looking and judging their eye. They might have made millions. They might have had their business completely go south and go under. But can they go home at night when something's happened down the line and turn to their spouse, their child, their grown up, their parent, their mother, and say, actually, this happened, but I didn't think about it at all. I just thought it was a great tool. You do the right things on the road, you do all the things, you stop the red light, you get your qualifications, you don't drink, you don't drive, you do all those good things, and something happens. Well, if you ignored all of those things, then very quickly, you as an individual, people around you will go, you were not responsible. And that's why responsible use of AI is there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of the GCS Leaders Series. We've got Phil Lunn today. He's the founder and CEO of Plator, which is an AI consultancy, one of our favorite subjects, as you know. The focus today will really be about the specialist area that Phil has, which is ethics and morality and understanding the risk within AI tools, with a storied career within technology, management consultancy, and commercial sales within technology. He really understands what customers need and why this is important. And we talk a lot about how to create frameworks and to think about the kind of outcomes of rolling out AI and what this means, whether that's being morally for society, but also for your business, and whether it's worth and what types of risk is best to take in order to move your business forward, which I know from myself and for other business leaders listening is something that we're all thinking about, is how to use these tools as in a moral and ethical and rewarding way. So without further ado, here's Phil. Phil, hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, David. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad at all. It's great to kind of have you on board. I think AI and your area of specialization is one of our key and main topics. So it's good to have a kind of an expert again from TBAI Hub here and speaking to yourself. So yeah, it's going to
Thank
be
you for the opportunity of being able to join the podcast, David.
yeah, brilliant, fantastic. So obviously, just to kind of reintroduce, obviously you as the founder and CEO of Plator, and we will kind of go into more what that's about, but also an organization, that we are quite involved with, which is obviously TBAI Hub, which in our local area, kind of Berkshire, M4 corridor, you're one of the AI policy group members. So that's really kind of interesting to kind of understand, and I think we kind of dig into that. But you've been 40 years in the industry. I hope you don't mind me saying that. So even longer than I've been in recruitment, Phil. So that's a long time. So tell us a little bit about your journey, about how you come to be working in this area. And one of the things I find quite interesting is people who have got really senior positions, really storied careers, are so excited by AI that they're kind of almost like throwing themselves back into it. It's like a refresh of your career. So how do you come to be here, where you're kind of on the cusp at something, maybe when some people might be thinking about slowing down a little?
Yeah, no, that's actually interesting, David. I think I can probably sort of frame that. So, to be clear, the 40 years was in actually high-tech industries, not specifically with the AI field, mostly in telecoms, in data transmission. Going back, starting really my first exposure really to technology was my late father. He used to work as a reader at Hull University board, and my predecessor home in 1977 with just a book, no keyboard, no screen, no 4G, and just said, "This is my processor. Do you want to play with it and see if you can get it working?" So got some lights working. Then really, I went through the full product life cycle through my career, early 20s, working in the world-leading British telecoms research and development labs at Bloxham for 5 years in R&D. Then moved into the product management and product marketing space through Nortel, grew that for 10 years, some major world first launches. I was involved with writing the business case and getting that going to market, involved very heavily in those days with technology forums, trying to get people together, industries together to get common. In the days we had many European standards. Accelerate through 1999, those voice, video, and data technologies we'd launched then became what everyone knows as the internet, and now we run voice, FaceTime, and video over those protocols. And some of those technology changes through my career has been, I think, really helpful to understand AI now, because I refer often, there's a lot of very bright individual graduates coming out with PhDs and stuff out of university, like I was many years ago. But at least you and I probably can have grounding in other groundbreaking technologies, phone name and number, the internet, the smartphone, all of those appear. So for me, AI is another technology. And I got into AI after doing a stint in consulting, 10 years in consulting and sales, because you hit the nail on the head. As an independent consultant, as I became in 2021 with Plator, you can't ignore the impact of major technology that's been launched. And I can't be in technology and consulting and not get my head around it. For me, though, it was a natural fit to understand not the high level chatbot stuff, but the deeper, how does AI work? How does machine learning work? Because I've always been in that tech space, and fundamentally, at the very heart of it, it's mathematics.
Yeah, and it's just interesting for me to see someone that's looking at it and understanding how it works. And when you say and how it works, from the conversations we've had, it seems like one of the things that interests you is not so much how it works in terms of the technology, but kind of how it actually integrates within the business, how people use it, how it can help teams, how it might even hinder teams.
Absolutely. And to be honest, that's something that's so important, because many people don't understand the power of the technologies that are deployed. And if we just focus on generative AI and ChatGPT, my own interest, by the way, just as a side into the whole idea of ethics and governance and AI safety and safe and sensible use, was spawned up my own daughter's comment when she was 19 back in 2020, January 2023. Cheers, Dad, we haven't got a future, jobs because of AI. So when it's your own family member, and I was sort of saying, "Oh, I'm adopting AI into the stack," and that's the view of the next generation who's going to be using all this. My view, in my latter stage of my career, is I can very much give back and give guidance, and through that, it is very much focusing then on safe and ethical use. There's 3 or 4 key areas that was often talked about, manipulation, cyber and biological and radiological, aspects that it's in the past been hard for people to get information. You've got to really dig around for it, and you've got to have access maybe through accreditation to biolabs to get information. And now at the drop of a fingertips, everybody's got this information, and we've seen things like Cambridge Analytica and how you can have manipulation and bias and misinformation. And so it's really that socio technology barrier, how the humans use it and how to implement and use it is really key. And that's something that's underlooked by many individuals, and ignored by some. Some are just ignorant and don't go forward because they're concerned about things like data privacy and ethical use, and their data just being consumed somewhere else. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people just do vibe coding and throw stuff out there, think it's perfectly safe, and then find there's all sorts of security hacks and governance issues and breaking the law, and they don't believe they have broken the law.
So as a pitch for Plator, hope I've pronounced that right. Is it Plato?
Yeah, there's Plato.
Yeah,
Yes,
very good.
yes.
So, what is your kind of particular area where you give business consultancy, and what would people engage you for in terms of this AI world?
Yeah, so there's 2, 3 areas. One is very much like a traditional consultancy, going in and doing that discovery and actually helping teams understand if you're looking at adopting AI, whether that's generative AI or you're putting, often people refer to automation. They don't really mean AI, they just want to automate or processes. And just looking through that whole stack of development and actually, saying, look, if you're going to put this in, then these aspects at this particular point of the process needs to be thought about. If you think about developing a project team to roll something out, typically in the past you look for a Prince 2 project manager. You may now look for somebody who has understanding what an AI implementation would mean, risk management, of a business. So for me, when it's still that change management, it's still that transformation management, it's optimizing, transform businesses from the as is to be, but with an understanding of AI and AI technologies, and then the governance that surrounds that is where I can advise businesses. One of the first things they should be thinking about is an AI governance forums, you know, and what impact is it going to have on their business? There's one thing getting a coder in and putting a bit of wid- whizzy widgets in place, and then they go off, and then a year later the models upgrade, and all of a sudden their customer chatbot is spewing all sorts of weird and wonderful answers to their own clients, and their reputation is there. So very much going in, helping businesses transform, ensuring that they understand the risk, helping explain the technology and when not to use AI is often the case. As I say, often it's a case of you could just use simple macros in an Excel spreadsheet for many small micro businesses, or you just use some robotic process automation (RPA) in certain areas. I think people think AI is the answer, and it's often you've got to look at the underlying processes. You don't just automate and put AI into existing processes. You really got to understand what you're trying to achieve as an input and output, and there's probably a better way of doing that.
And I think, to go into the TBAI hub, because you're one of their advisors on ethics. So again, just to explain what the TBAI hub is, it's a University of Reading sponsored organization that we're both affiliated to. That I find really interesting, because what they're talking about is not so much the technology, but more about the implementation, the ethics, the actual kind of business strategy and use cases, and actually how
Absolutely,
people feel about it. I don't think it's very much, it's more about how people feel about it and use it than this is how you set it up, which I think most business
and
leaders
that's the
care
thing.
about,
So
don't they?
there are the 2 layers, well, there's really 3 layers. There's the technical AI, there's the non-technical AI, and then there's the whole governance stack. So, even simple things like, when you're running an AI query, what sort of bias is there at the there's some fantastic work by, say, Oxford University that shows graphical maps where the geographical distance and answer from, the US is very much skewed towards, Western, they call it weird, Western economic, rich developed nations. But if you ask it
I've
questions
never
about
heard that one before. Is we have that, the weird. So,
weird, WEIRD, yes,
okay.
Western economic, I'd have to look it up now.
Well,
Gone
you
mind
just
blank.
said
So
it. I said it
that's
sounded
one to
great, but
pause
yeah,
and
no,
play back,
I
isn't
see
it?
exactly what you mean. It's the kind of, it's a certain. We were talking to someone earlier today about kind of cultural references, but we have a certain culture, so therefore the AI that we've trained has a certain cultural references, but other cultures don't have the same reference, do they?
No, exactly, and there's been many notable cases, in the US and in Holland, where they've rolled out a medical system and it's done some sort of triage and assessment based on a set of criteria. But just because you are, white or an ethnic person of color, the models were trained, and the models were coming up with a correlation between income, and rich and poor, and actually making recommendations not based on your background and your various people around the world have got different DNA kind of stuff. It was really behind the scenes coming out with recommendations on that, and that's just wrong. That's just wrong. So there's a whole host of areas on ethical use and making sure that the answers are correct. We had some really interesting conversations the other day with a new safety group set in Germany, Safe AI Germany. One of my participants in the Centre for AI Safety, I'm a facilitator for their AI safety and ethics courses. She set up a German contingent and pointing out on a sort of debating forum that actually models are tuned on human values, but they've not considered really anything to do with animal values. And if you ask a model picture of a pig, and it gives you pictures of pigs in fields, but doesn't really give you real pictures of what pigs are seen. And you say, ask about, tell me about chickens, and it shows you images of cooked chicken. So it's like, well, you might think they're weird kind of examples, but if you're going into something they're saying, medical example, and you then talk about some sort of allergic reactions, you want something to be based on real information that's coming out, not sort of the morals interpretation of what it thinks you want. And that whole sort of, the safe use of the example the other day I posted on LinkedIn. I wasn't asking a model for this, but it was saying, your three numbers are all to do with 18. If you add, 5 and 5 and 8, 558 together, it's 18. You add 6 and 3 and 9 together, 639, it's 18. And you add 5 and 5 and 4, it's 18. Well, no, it's 5 and 5, 4. It's not 18, it's 14. It's predicting that. No, that you can have a laugh about that. But if you then put that as an uncontrolled output from one model that's doing some, say, pharmacy drug prescription down the line, and it suddenly gives you a completely wrong number of the amount of grams of a certain drug you should take, that's quite a serious ethical issue. And the other aspects such as law, law in many areas, people say put regulation in place, but it's in often places a judge will interpret the law or the jury will interpret the law. And in many cases, the law is silent. They say the law is silent on the matter because nobody wants to define it. And therefore, how can you have an ethical AI system that's advising people when people put something into their chatbot, telling me about, I don't know, this divorce case, or telling me about what I can do with a neighborhood dispute, and the AI models are coming out with very confident answers, but actually it's hallucinated. That is all serious ethical implications because people take that output as an answer and then act on it. And they're the easy to handle use cases. Forget about the unfortunate instances where we've heard of people taking advice on mental health, and the aspects of that. And an example was given to me yesterday by somebody very close to me, an elderly 90-year-old lady using Alexa for the first time. I think she's about 96. Actually finding it useful because her sight and her hearing is going a little bit, so she can say, "Alexa, choose me the radio 4, the radio 1," and then passes a comment. Well, I hope Alexa works over the bank holiday weekend. It's like, and that was a genuine sort of comment. Somebody doesn't fully understand. This is not a real person at the far end. That was great. It's doing all those things and says good night to them and feels a bit more less lonely. That's all fantastic. But also at the same time, if people are believing the word is, I hate to say, anthropomorphism, treating these like real human beings that have holidays, then we have a societal issue emerging.
And that's still where you come into the education side of things. So I think going back to ethics, because I think this is a key topic, when you the way you think and talk about it. And I guess there's a few things within ethics that just to kind of unpack and think about. So when you look at ethics, how do you judge it? I mean, what are you judging good ethics to be?
Yeah, there's a very big debate. And can I add ethics and morality? That's something that's really coming out now. And even Google DeepMind is pushing morality. And this is where it is a bit of a conversation and an education awareness, and that's the sort of stuff we do through, say, Thames Valley AI, is to make people start to think about when they use tools like this, what are the ethical implication? What are you actually, what's the impact on other people? They're talking about things like the fair systems and safe, frameworks. Just because you can do something with a model doesn't mean to say you should do it. Now, you could take a very simple example that somebody just wants to use an AI, generate some simple blog, put a clickbait stuff out there and say, AI is the worst thing in the world, it's going to kill you, and the world's finished today. And it goes viral. And because people just believe what they read, now I'd say that's not a particularly ethical use of AI to very quickly distill and automate a blog that just gets viral hits. An ethical use of AI would be more looking at, you know, should sh you know, should certain things be done? So another example, going to the medical situation, um, people talk about loss of jobs, you could frame that under ethics. Is it ethical to, allow all this automation to happen and allow all these jobs to go say in a hospital triage scenario and lay a load of nurses off? It's a cost saving, it helps maybe speed up waiting times, isn't necessarily an ethical thing to do. Contrast that with, I haven't fact checked this particular one, but I do believe it's a good example to use anyway in South Korea, that they're not replacing jobs because they haven't got enough nurses and doctors to do the initial triage. So in that instance, having a bot when you go into A&E to actually do that initial triage, go to, X-ray, go to, the pharmacist, whatever it is a good use. And ethics is always difficult because around the world, people's view of right and wrong changes, and that's one of the
It
hard
comes
things you
back to that cultural element, doesn't it? It comes back to the different people view ethics in different ways.
it does, and then when all the models are based on, it's predominantly US-based models, the
The
ethics,
word weird that we've already worked out here, Phil. We're on it
yeah.
now.
I mean, give you an example. In the course in Central AI Safety course, there was a debate facilitated exercise, and we're asked to debate the difference between trustworthiness and honesty. And I have to say, it takes a few minutes to think about this. It's really hard to decide what do you mean by trust and what do you mean by honesty. And then I'll add later on. So, for instance, I could say I honestly believe that is warm and hot outside because I can see sun, and I'm pretty sure the blue sky and at lunchtime is good. My honest belief is that it's still warm. Now, we could have had a very quick cold front come over. The truth is, I'd only know that if I was actually outside and testing the temperature. But in some languages around the world, as I found out in the summer last year, because it was an international course, that in Poland and Japan, trust and truth and honesty is one word. So when you're training a westernized model, ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever, on two different words and trying to define, do you give the truthful answer or do you give an honest answer, and the subtleties between that, you go to a completely different culture in the world, and actually there isn't a distinction. So, yeah, and the reason why it's really important, people are increasingly turning to these models for advice and just taking the two-line answer they see on Gemini, Google, and just taking that as the gospel truth without questioning the sources, without questioning whether this makes sense in the context they're talking about. And all of those are really quite important ethical considerations as these technologies are rolled out into society. Um,
And then
because
the kind
ultimately,
of, if you think about it in a business context, obviously business is focused on making profit, right? So, I mean, the question I kind of ask is how when you're dealing with the business, but the point I wanted to make first was being seen as unethical in a business now is very bad for your reputation. If you have if something hurts you reputationally, then that can really be bad for profit, right? So I guess when you're speaking to business, about this, how are you going to roll out your systems? How are you how are you going to take this advice? Then this must be a key part of what you're saying, is that if you do this wrong, this can really hurt you as a
Yeah,
business.
absolutely. Absolutely, because, it comes back to that chatbot example. Um, for instance, somebody might have some training. I was talking to a business who was just doing some sort of training, and it was HR type training. It was nothing to do with AI, but they thought they could maybe add a little AI module at the end to get course feedback and just give a little answer and great sort of stuff. And this is more maybe AI safety than AI ethics per se. And it'd be very easy to chain a little, GPT or gem or a tiny little bit of code to give a sort of summary of your course, success and give a bit of generative text. There was a very large retailer, online retailer, that launched its AI companion a few months ago, and it was giving short answers. So looking at, say, ski gear, short answers like, yes, there's viscosity and there's heat retention and there's, a vapor, breathability and all those things. But I was really trying to tie down the specific angle between, you know, sort of drops per inch, how much does it let keep water in versus how much is it allowed to breathe, and why the price points would vary to bear the best thing. And I very quickly found out that the models had moved from just giving advice about ski gear to give me a whole page of, biological and physical, chemical stuff on drops per inch and size of droplets and absorptivity. And I jailbroken it without intending to jailbreak, by the way. Now, for a very large retailer like that, if you're then suddenly finding that those what it thinks is, he's obviously got a highly set of trained developers, puts this light touch, uh, this is your ski gear, this is your food, but the next thing is they're giving a whole host of information that it shouldn't be giving. That's massively brand damaging, because the instant that you as a company gives an answer to somebody else and they act on that answer and it's not being human verified, courts will look very much as, no, the human, the owner of the company, or is the one still responsible for giving the answer out. And the great example, David, on Air Canada, there's where a bereaved individual of a family was told by their chatbot they could get a free flight to go to the funeral. And then turned out, no, you can't do that. I think there was some internal policy. Don't quote me on this. There was some internal policy. Air Canada employees, families could take advantage of that. And somewhere their AI model had picked up on this policy, so it wasn't hallucinating. But nobody's told the model actually this is internal only versus external. And the courts actually awarded in favour of the person who said, well, I was told by your chatbot I could get free flights. They awarded in the favour of that and made it clear to Air Canada that they were trying to say, oh, well, my AI system gave the answers, nothing to do with me. And the judge was like, no, you, the human, the CEO, is
You
responsible for how.
programmed this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
in a recent conversation I had, someone said to me, accountability rises. Same as shit, so accountability rises. So, and I don't think you can ever give an AI accountability, can you? Because I mean, you can
It's
never,
very, it's
you
very,
can give
well,
it
exactly. It's very,
accountability in terms of it's accountable to give you the answer. But like you're saying here, if it gives an answer or does something, it's not real, so it cannot you cannot blame the AI
yeah.
on.
And this is
You
what,
can try, but this is where ethics and morality and reputational damage comes in, because you can say, well, it was the AI that did it, but nobody is going to accept that, I assume,
yeah.
in your
And this is,
experience.
this is the thing, because my personal view is very much a personal view, a strong view. And I believe that probably people within TVAI and themselves would agree, but we probably need to write a policy on that. I don't know whether that's something we cut out, by the way. I don't know, but no, there's been some really interesting debates I've had with working with having done the Blue Dot Impact courses on artificial general intelligence. Another world leading sort of safety training research organization, whereby the pros and cons of helping in the legal aspects, the legal space. Legal documents are dense, they're thick, and AI would be brilliant at very quickly summarizing the key aspects and putting out the key, I don't know, case references in the past, speed things up especially. Fantastic. And as one individual in the debate that we're having called out, that courts are very clogged up with, these should be focusing on, rapes and murder and serious crime and stuff like that, but they're caught up with neighborhood disputes and,
Haven't paid your TV
somebody's
license or
neighbor's
something like that.
trees
Yeah.
dropping some leaves in my driveway and you're wasting court time. And there's a case, genuine case to say, well, why wouldn't you pass the control to a AI assisted bot or an AI assisted judge or whatever it is to very quickly churn those court cases out and ultimately say, let the AI decide on the leaves of the thing. And it was an interesting debate because if you think about the ethical implications of that, the second you go over the line of allowing an AI to make a legal decision, first off, you've taken the human out of the loop, and that's quite key. You've gone over the boundary of actually, the whole idea of the law is based on circumstances really, and then would an AI? Because the other thing that we're seeing with AI, the more advanced frontier models, is they start to have what they call emergent capabilities. They start to do things in unexpected ways. They were trained on one thing and they come out with an answer on another. Let's suppose in 5 years' time, you've agreed that there's junior judges, AI judges, bots that are making decisions on low-level main neighborhood disputes. Who's to say in an unexpected outcome that the AI model doesn't start to say, well, hold on a minute, humans have decided that the Earth, which is molecules and trees and whatever, and the AI model is silicon-based, it's not human-based. Actually, humans have artificially defined land boundaries over the years, and actually the tree has got more rights as a tree in the world, giving off oxygen and absorbing carbon, to dump its leaves wherever it should do, and it shouldn't be artificially constrained by a legal land registry map of a boundary line. Bit of a far-fetched scenario, but actually...
And also, it's been around for 500
Well,
years, so it's been around
exactly.
much
So
longer than the human.
so you can imagine now you've agreed that you're going to give the power, you've passed the law to say low-level disputes decided by an AI and has an emergent property, and it comes out with something like that. Now, maybe a human judge might come out with something like that, and then it would be contested with the Supreme Courts, and we'd eventually make a law on it. But can you imagine the consequences and the press coverage you'd get from a AI machine decides that 5,000-year-old oak has got more precedence than either neighbour?
I think AI has to make an answer, right? It can never say, I don't know, in my opinion, like from my experience, it can never say, I don't know. So if you ask any question, we'll always give you an answer. Human beings will say, I don't know. I mean, that's slightly wrong because sometimes you ask AI a question and it's like, because I put it into the wrong bit, it says, sorry, I can't find that out for you, which is really, really annoying. But anyway, that's just part of the thing. But I think that for me, giving that answer, it wants to help you all the time. It wants to help you, wants to help you, wants to help you. But sometimes that help that it can give cannot be very helpful at all. And I think that's where you're kind of coming from, isn't it? It's kind of just understand here that this is a very helpful tool that can be very unhelpful if you don't understand where it's coming from. So I think we've talked quite a lot here, Phil, about, the problems here, and I think we'll kind of circle back onto this at the end. We've talked quite a lot about the problems, but I guess what you're about is trying to break through these problems and try and, because I would say a leader listening to this thinking everything Phil's saying sounds like I should just not do this.
Aha.
It just sounds like it sounds like a nightmare to me. And if obviously there's big corporates rolling out AI, I read about it all the time. How can it help me? And I see within my own business and with other businesses that sometimes people have these great ideas, but it's really, really hard to actually implement them. So what was the first advice that you when you sit down with them, what do you give them as advice?
Yes, there's some great frameworks that already exist, whether it's from, the UK government frameworks, whether it's from Alan Turing frameworks. There were some very clear, very simple to understand, relatively simple to understand frameworks that just talk about basic things like risk management. And a lot of this is in a way, David, about risk management. So as long as you've assessed the types of things you're trying to do with your AI, especially generative AI, as long as you've looked at the touch points that it may be affecting people internally and externally to your organization, as long as you've assessed that, and you've thought about well, what if it does this type of thing scenarios, and I'm okay with that. I don't mind if it does that. The risk is low and the impact is low, or actually I've got a contingency in place. That's there. As long as you've done that, that's no problem. So standard risk management, putting governance in place, having individuals trained up enough to think about AI governance and what that actually means is relatively straightforward, and focusing on 2 or 3 of the key frameworks. It is quite straightforward in some respects. And from that, you've transferred something which is like, I'm just going to rush out and develop some vibe coding thing and put it up on the website or release it to my clients, to actually, like any other development we've ever had in the past, you've got a development, you go through a bit of user acceptance testing. You've actually, in that development in the past, you've usually taken some requirements in, and then various different teams would have looked at that through the development process, and it would be released. So the answer is absolutely, big fan that we should move forward with AI, and there are many, many places we use AI and should use AI. And in many cases, just think about document writing for, say, evidence to the UK government or to United Nations. I recently did a piece of work with one of the TVA members on that. Using AI absolutely to generate the first, second, third draft, brilliant. The point at which you suddenly say, right, I'm going to trust that just to publish out to the website without the human view, is a risk you've introduced. And if you're not really think about the consequences of what your decision you've done to that, you just want to get it out there quickly and really, great, I'll be first to market. That's when you introduce a potential reputational behavior thing. Just to put a simple governance rule in, say for any mid-sized organization, say, right, we've got all the drafts. Now the marketing director needs to read it, and actually go through it and sign it off as a human made and say, I've read the whole document and I'm happy for this blog to go out. Yeah. At that point in time, you've protected yourself in numerous ways. One, you've not got a blog that's somewhere in the sentence, and sometimes it is down to right in the middle of a sentence, there will be a fact that is wrong. Like my example of 18, there is a fact that is wrong. And if you're putting something out, now, if you're just a marketing agency talking about, I don't know, landscape gardening, most people may not worry about that. But if you're a pharmaceutical company, or if you're a legal company, or if you're an accountant, let's suppose an accountant lets a blog be written by AI without the accountant checking it, and it has a simple mathematical error. That is really basic maths. 5 + 5 + 4 is 14, not 18. And they say, yes, the UK government's latest HMRC guidance is blah, 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 blah. And here is all the facts, and here's the things you need to work out. And that is wrong. Yeah, fundamentally wrong. You've got a problem. So I'm not saying don't use it. I'm not saying don't automate things and use vibe coding, as long as you check where the vibe coding is doing, how is it going to impact. The key thing about the governance is to then put the right checks and balances into the organization. Ask yourself the questions, go through a checklist. What could happen. And another good example, I don't know how much people have used AI regularly, tools regularly. Very recently, Claude hit all sorts of outage issues, down for a few hours and then back up for a couple of days and down for a few hours. The US government, actually suddenly turned Claude as being used by the US government into the Department of War said, actually, it's a supply chain risk. Now, you're talking about the big companies have got teams of people doing this, but if you suddenly developed a whole tool and you put a single point of failure, this is where I'm going with this, based on a single tool called Claude, or, from Anthropic, and your organization is now dependent on that, and it stops, and you haven't put the right thought around that, as you would with anything else, if you've got a single point of failure of of an individual, leading a project, or any other single point of failure risk assessments. If you just blindly roll that out and then Claude stops because it's denial of disservice or whatever happened with it, or a policy from the US government and says, right, you're ripping it out of your systems, you've got an issue. So a lot of the AI governance, safety and ethics is not reinventing the wheel. It is, tried and tested in the airline industry. It's tried and tested in the food standards industry. Everything is about assessing risk. Everything is about thinking about the impacts and the implications. People adopting AI just seem to go straight in, write it. It's quick. It's magic. It's going to give you the right answer. Just go with it. And that's where some
Not
of the
thinking about
the
the way outcome. So I guess what So looking at this, one of the things you say about business and kind of go back to that kind of profit and commercial element of it is sometimes risk equals reward, right? So obviously, I don't know if you get into the situation, but if there's the risk that it could cause me reputational damage, but there's also the reward that I could do everything much quicker and beat all my competitors and make more money, right? Would you say then, therefore, that is the leader's responsibility? I mean, your job is these are the risks and these are
Yeah,
the
there's
reward.
exactly
You have to
hit
weigh
the
this
nail
up
on the
in
head.
your
That's
mind, Mr. CEO or whatever.
yeah.
What are you going to do? But best that you know these things.
Yeah, that's exactly it. With the awareness that having gone through the conversation with yourself, David, now, with that awareness, I don't know whether from your aspects from the start of the podcast to now, it's now sort of changing. You're starting to think, hold on a minute. If this is low risk and my profits, I can get something out quickly, I can save some costs, and that's really good. And it doesn't really matter if the color of the paint is slightly off. Doesn't matter if it's a light green rather than a dark green. Maybe in some cases it is important. Then you're making the right informed decisions. You've gone through that. So I've gone in, I've talked to you, I've run a workshop, whatever it might be. We've looked at the different processes and you've kind of gone, it's absolutely fine. Then also the CEO or the business owner, the department or functional head might go, oh, I hadn't thought about what if your AI tool stops working. Maybe I need to actually have a second AI tool there running in parallel in the background. I mean, resiliency in the telco world was absolutely 100%. Any big organization will have dual resiliency, triple resiliency, will never use one single operator anywhere in the world because there's no single point of failure. When you're planning, your routes, on Google Maps going anywhere, you never plan that there will be only driving up the M40 up the M1. You'll always have that possibility of a diversion. You'll always have to have that plan B. So I'm saying it's not complex rocket science to think about governance when it comes from an AI point of view. What it does mean to say is to think about, have I got the right AI skills? Have I understood the implications of taking a human out? If you've automated something, and that's technically not AI, but I've automated something, and then something goes wrong, does it take to fix? And if it goes wrong, does it have a significant business operation issue, or does it just mean temporarily something goes wrong? And all of those are just extra decision points. And once you've made that more holistic, informed view, then you can document it. You can make clear what decisions you've made. So if anything goes wrong down the line and you end up in a court of law and it will happen, and the judge will ask you, David in GCS, what documents did you write, when you were making these decisions? Oh, I didn't do anything. I just got a vibe code and I just did it. Okay, well, then the judge is going to say, well, David, you were not very responsible with your AI rollout because you just did it. If you went, actually, I've got a risk assessment document and I had a look at this and we put these plans in place. And if something went wrong, we've got a plan B and still something goes wrong, the judge is more likely to say, okay, well, you did everything in your best possible power to do what you would do. I often use the analogy with driving and cars and the road safety system. Frontier AI models and safety isn't just about the combustion engine and a car going at 200 miles an hour around a racetrack. Yeah, that's one element. You've got the drivers, but then you think about the whole ecosystem of car safety. You've got garages that repair your car to a certain standard. Every 3 years, you're required to do an MOT that checks, whether your car is roadworthy. You've got people taking driving licenses for a basic car or an HGV lorry or a PSV bus driving license. So you got this whole, and then you've got the police monitoring. You've got this whole eco stuff of things happening. You don't just suddenly throw a car out on the road and say this is the best thing. It'll get you there fast. Yeah, it'll get me to Newcastle in probably an hour and a half. And that's the scenario I'd like you to think about. It's like, if you just said go for it and suddenly you zoomed up the motorway and killed a few people on the way, and that's not really maybe a good thing to say, but caused mayhem and havoc, is that acceptable? Is it ethically right? Is it the
To
right
get there
thing to do?
quick, you
There's
got
no
there quicker, but you
government.
killed some people on the way. So is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is
yeah,
that
yeah,
better? Yeah.
yeah.
So
Or do you go, I've got a really nice new car. It's very environmentally friendly. It can accelerate fast and slowly, and it's really good at this, and it will brake way faster than anybody else. And it's road tested and it's safe, and everybody knows how to do it properly. That's a really good thing.
I guess what we're saying here is it's about guardrails, isn't it? It's about basically when you're rolling out these elements, understanding, to go back to the ski boot or ski gear example, only answer questions about ski gear and being very specific about that. I actually heard quite an interesting, I think I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about AI podcasters. So they've invented, it sounds quite scary actually. If this was my day job, I'd be worried about this article. But the AI podcasters, basically, they've invented these personalities that they've given personalities to, and they talk about certain subjects. For instance, there's someone called Nigel Clipwell or something, right? And he talks about gardening. Okay. And then there's another lady who talks about knitting. And what they said was, and it kind of goes back to what you said, was we give them subjects that nobody can get too upset about. So if I was to give them a subject such as defense, or politics or something like that, and then they just let them they kind of guide them to do their podcast. But if they just do it about gardening and keep it on gardening, then nothing can go too wrong. But if they were to set up one which did it on, you know, defense, for instance, and that could have really huge outcomes for the 3,000 podcasts this AI podcaster. And I think that's what you're saying, is it? Identify where you're going to use this and put like restrictions on it. And restrictions is quite a big word, but I think what you're saying is that the risk of just letting it go wild is too much.
Yeah, I mean, and you got to split between the business user, the small business user, like you, me, and people in the Thames Valley and stuff like that, and using the models as sort of the deployers of the models. There's a very big difference between that and then the restrictions that you put on the big frontier models. There's two separate things. So for a lot of what we're talking about is the what I do, Plato and stuff, it goes in and talks to businesses about actually that safe and statically deployment with these big tools that are happening in your area. If you move the conversation to the big frontier, tools and what's happening with, say, Anthropic and OpenAI, there's a very different sort of set of rules that they're needing to think about put in, because what you were touching on there, bit was the whole idea of AI companions that have come out. And like any technology, the AI is especially a dual use technology. It can be used for good and it can be used for bad. Any technology, anything we do in the world, gardening, miniature gardening can actually be used for good or good for bad. You could have a hedge trimmer, or you could actually go into a shop with a hedge trimmer and a battery pack and do quite a lot of damage. Dual use, same tool. AI particularly is there. But the thing is to think about there is that it is the power and the understanding or lack of understanding of how powerful these tools are. So when you come to AI companions, and you mentioned hallucinations, and it's okay it should always give an answer. There should be circumstances that it should say, actually, I do not know. And you will get the answers. They will say, sorry, I am not a medically trained. You need to seek medical advice. It can't in those situations, even go back to the South Korean triage thing. If your bot sort of triaged and says, actually, all you need to do is home and take a paracetamol, and you're actually going through a major heart attack at the time, just giving an answer isn't right. It should say, I don't know. I've sent the alarm off to a paramedic who's going to hear in person in a few seconds. Just wait. Yeah. I suppose technically you're still saying it's giving an answer, but it's a different outcome answer. It's not sort of like I've got to make an answer up. So AI companions is where, and I think that we're going to see, and there's an emerging field here where people are really looking at impact on the human psychology and the human mind. First off, that some people are saying, our ability to think is diminishing because we're handing too much control of the thinking, the cerebral brain cells. We're letting AIs think too much for us. So, over the years will drop. Then there's also example, I use that lady with the Alexa, but people are starting to turn to AI emotions and companions and AI lovers and all that sort of stuff, and that is spilling over into an area which is quite risky. In many
A
instances, it
whole
can be
new
good.
area of ethics if you start
Well
talking about
well, it's a
love
whole
and
new area of
romance.
ethics, and I don't know where I stand, because part of me says if you've got somebody, an elderly person suffering dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever, and this person is actually able, this bot is able to talk to that person and remind them about the medication, or just say, "Actually, you've just done this, you've just cooked something, or you've left something on the cooker." That's hugely beneficial in some respects. But if then, as a knock-on effect to in a beneficial scenario, that person then believes that their deceased husband is still alive or something like that, and it affects their behavior, that's a massive ethical, where do you go forward with that? Or do you say, "No, we're not allowing these things to happen?" But then you end up with lots of people, elderly people who might be lonely, depressed, and whose health is going backwards. So that whole area, I'm not an ethical or a philosophical or psychological person, I'm about to stress that, but it is an area that it is going to happen. The BBC recently talked about AI toys. There's a whole thing on there, and there's only about 7 Cambridge University leaded the report. 7 research things in the world who looked at the impact of toys. So a toy, talking about terms and conditions. you "Oh, I'm sorry, this doesn't obey with the terms and conditions," and the two-year-old throws the toy away. But there's certain developmental points where even just phone use, let alone about use of AI for youngsters, is massively affecting their later life development. And all of that is new stuff that's coming out. So coming back to big companies just rolling these tools out, everybody just using these tools, thinking they're fine, letting their kids play with Gemini and having a chat on a chat bot, as a 2-year-old. "Oh, I've got a fun little game here. Let me talk to you." Then you move into that's an impact we don't understand on psychology because we've not had them so much. Then you move into the second part. It's like, let's suppose then you've got some bad actor who decides that they want to eavesdrop and spy within that home. So somebody buys a cuddly little toy that's chatting, whatever, but there's a little bit of spyware in the background that's just broadcasting everything, and they're getting the voice and the background conversation about the family. And then you move into the big debate about the more data that's collected about everything we do. Whether it's your Fitbit and your health, and then you're asking questions about what's my heart rate is this, what do I do? I've taken these medications. Can I take this medication? All of this data, which is private data, but probably not under GDPR considered privacy data of stuff that we thought in the past, which is phone and name and telephone number and all those things. This is all very personal data to yourself. So when you're talking about frontier models, I'm not talking about the local businesses development stuff. I'm talking about AI safety and ethics, and all of this data is now being collected and can be used in increasingly in vast amounts of quantities. And not only the data is collected, you might say it's always been there, but the ability to process it in a meaningful way through a machine learning model in the hands of individuals that the information wasn't necessarily intended for. That is a big societal impact.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it gives us a lot to think about, and I think just to kind of round this up and to kind of go back to the original conversation, because there's a father of 3 daughters who have a similar conversation. I think you mentioned at the start that one of the reasons that threw you into this was your daughter saying, "Oh, I won't have a job now." Hopefully, she has got a job now, or she is
She has, yeah,
gainfully
yeah.
employed. But how did you answer that question? Because I think that's, it's not just leaders, it's people listening to this thinking, well, how do you answer that question? Because there is an argument to say that is true.
Yeah, there is an argument. So, how do you answer that question? So, for me personally, I realised at that point in time, I actually felt physically a little bit ill. I actually thought I've got a conflict here, and it took me probably 3-4 weeks to fathom out what the conflict was. The conflict was, I cannot be a technology consultant and a consultant talking about innovative ways of working without talking about AI and the impact of that. But my own youngest daughter, as I say, was 19 at the time, was saying what she said. That's when I realized, actually, it is about the safe and responsible adoption of technology into society, as we've talked about through the last hour, about the ethical way things are used. So that's where people like you, like me, and everybody else. So a lot of what I do as well is train and talk about and give presentations on the safe and ethical use, because the more society understands these issues, and it's not really understood by anybody, probably 0.2% of the world really understand all of these things. They will do in 3, 4, 5 years' time, but the carts, the horses definitely bolted by then. But the more that we get more people in society listening to podcasts like this, or the more people engage in the conversation, start to raise their concerns and questions through Thames Valley AI events or through podcasts like this, the more that actually we will steer collectively the right way that these tools will help our society. We need these sort of tools to help our society. There's so many brilliant use cases you can see coming out of use of, and I'm not talking generative AI. I'm talking about predictive AI here. Tools that can predict, the next pandemic, or predict, cancer cures, or all those sort of really fantastic use cases. So for me, I think it's just a case of when people think about the tech and they think, oh, I've got this great widget, I can vibe code, to also then think, actually, I've also thought about the ethical use of this. I've thought about how I'm going to govern it, and I'm going to think about the safe use. And having gone through that, it's very simple, logical decision making of yes, it's beneficial, yes, it's useful, and yes, it's the right thing. Because ultimately, those business owners, they might not be looking and judging their eye. They might have made millions. They might have had their business completely go south and go under. But can they go home at night when something's happened down the line and turn to their spouse, their child, their grown up, their parent, their mother, and say, actually, this happened, but I didn't see it happening because I really thought about it, or I didn't think about it at all. I just thought it was a great tool, and now I'm in this situation, you know. And that comes back to that car thing. It's like you do the right things on the road, you do all the things, you stop at the red light, you get your qualifications, you don't drink, you don't drive, do all those good things, and something happens. Well, something happened. If you ignored all of those things, then very quickly, you as an individual, people around you will go, you are not responsible. And that's why responsible use of AI is there.
Fantastic. Well, it's been great to speak to you today, Phil. I think that's really, for the listeners, I think it will really help them to see how you protect yourself, and your business in terms of how you roll these things out. And then obviously if you're doing it in a good and thoughtful way, I believe that can kind of make your business more successful and the tools that you roll out more successful. So I'm sure
Absolutely.
that people can reach out to yourself online, and we'll obviously kind of loop you and tag you in when we post this to find out more if they're doing within their own businesses. And I know so many businesses are thinking about that. But thank you very much for your time today. It's been great, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much indeed.